Chapter 17. Cover of darkness. Chase at dawn. A narrow escape. The arrow flew true, tearing through fur and flesh and sinking deep into the side of the rabbit.
Good shot,
Ganondorf said, plucking the animal from the ground.
I'll be glad to have a break from all that venison.
One of the forest's many rules was that Link was only allowed to kill an animal if Saria gave him permission to do so. Having just finished the last of the deer, Link had mentally vowed to shoot something different this time. They walked back beneath the shallow forest canopy, where the late afternoon light gave the leaves a golden tinge. They had traveled far from the influence of the Great Fairy and the Deku Tree, and the ever-present thrum of the forest's magic was but a whisper now.
Is that a rabbit?
Midna looked up excitedly from where she was bent over the fire. She had used her magic to create a small cooking fire that needed no fuel and did not smoke.
Thank the gods! I was so sick of venison jerky. Here, get it cooked.
Link tossed the rabbit to her, and then sat down heavily on the ground. Saria was standing next to him, her bare feet buried in the soil, like she did whenever they made camp. She did not eat, and seldom drank. As far as Link could tell, Saria obtained her nourishment in the same manner as a plant, from the soil and the sun. Her waifish brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she mouthed strange syllables. Presently her eyes flickered open, and she withdrew her feet from the moist loam.
We are alone within this stretch of forest, she said. If you are being pursued, then your trackers do not move within the vision of the trees. Are you sure?
Ganondorf said. He always seemed to regard Saria with a modicum of caution unusual in the big man, and spoke of forest magic with distinct apprehension.
Is it possible that they have found a way to hide themselves from the forest's magic?
Saria frowned minutely.
It is true that the soul of the wood is weak this far from the Deku Tree's grove, but only powerful magic can disrupt that connection. And the use of such magic would leave other traces, that is certain.
He sighed through his teeth and impatiently watched Midna skin the rabbit. When Navi came fluttering through the trees, the bright light of her wings appearing to flicker in and out of existence as she was alternately obscured and then revealed by the tree branches, he looked up sharply.
Well?
The fairy landed on Ganondorf's shoulder.
The forest ends about half a mile from here, and there's a big gap of open space before you get to the foothills. Once you're there, though, there's plenty of places you could hide. But while we're riding across the field, we'll be in plain view. During the day, at least,
Link said. Navi fluttered over to him.
I think that, if you guys rode fast, you might be able to make it to the mountains overnight.
Hey, Midna shouted from beside the smokeless flames.
Have either of you two considered the fact that maybe there isn't anybody stalking us? We can't afford to risk that,
Ganondorf said.
As soon as it's dark enough, we need to ride as fast as we can, and hope that we won't be spotted.
They sat there, in the glade, and ate as the sun approached the horizon and the liquid gold of twilight darkened into the cool of the early evening. Although her emotions were nearly impossible to read, Link sensed that Saria was a bit reluctant to see them, or at least him, leave.
Thank you for your help, Saria,
he said, when he spotted her watching him.
We wouldn't have made it through the forest without you.
She smiled.
It was the Deku Tree's will, not mine. But I was honored to act as a guide for one blessed by the gods such as yourself, Link.
Yeah, Midna interjected,
I'm sure going to miss Creepy Leaf Girl. Bye, Creepy Leaf Girl.
Saria, as usual, ignored Midna. The only one of them she had ever treated with any degree of familiarity was Link, perhaps because he was the only one of them that genuinely enjoyed being in the forest. They mounted their horses and set off towards the plains as the woods darkened. Looking back, Link could see Saria watching them for a brief moment, before she disappeared into the trees.
So what is that girl's deal, anyways?
Midna asked aloud.
Is she a plant, or something?
Navi floated alongside her.
The Kokiri are forest sprites. Their lives are bound to the forest and the Deku Tree, so they can never leave these woods. But as long as they don't, they can live forever.
Link wondered how old Saria was. Older than Ganondorf? Probably not, but certainly much more ancient than she looked.
Navi,
Ganondorf said,
you need to find somewhere to hide. Your light will give us away. Oh, right,
she said, and zoomed into Link's breast pocket.
If you still had your hat, I could have hid there.
She looked up at him. Absent-mindedly, he patted his head. It still felt unfamiliar to not be wearing his favorite green hat or clothes. He had left those back in Hyrule, with the Woodfall Gerudo.
Hey,
Midna chuckled.
The fairy has the best seats in the house. Great view of up Link's nose.
Ganondorf held up a hand for silence. The tree cover was thin now. Link could see where the forest ended and the plains stretched before them, rolling towards the hulking darkness of the mountains.
Think it's dark enough?
Link asked.
It'll have to be,
Ganondorf responded.
Ride. Now.
Link spurred Epona forward and they set off at a fast trot, weaving through the now sparse tree cover and emerging on the plains. The ground was rocky here, close to the mountains, and grass grew in wide patches.
Can't we go faster?
Midna said, her voice wavering comically with the motions of her horse.
I feel like we're not making much progress. We can't tire the horses out,
Link explained, giving Epona a reassuring pat.
We'll need to ride all night, remember? Wish I could still fly.
She crossed her arms, and then quickly uncrossed them to avoid losing her balance atop the animal.
There's a bottleneck pass at the foot of Snow Peak,
Ganondorf pointed, but Link could discern no details from the dark shapes of the mountains now that night had fallen.
We'll head there.
Link frowned.
Sounds like a likely place for an ambush.
Ganondorf pointed with his other arm.
There's another path leading up into the village on the other side of the mountain. Until they know what route we'll be taking, they'll have to wait for us to make the first move. Village.
Midna repeated,
there's a village. Kashuto, on the far side of the mountain.
They continued to ride on into the night, the rhythmic thudding of Epona's hooves threatening to lull Link into a sense of complacency. He scanned the dark hills of the plains the best he could, but could discern nothing through the veil of night.
Midna, how's your vision in the dark?
She pressed her lips together tightly.
Not good. Normally I'm all about the night, it's kind of my thing. That was back when I was little Midna, though. So you can't do the shadow magic either? No whoop.
Her voice hitched suddenly as her horse took an unexpected turn. When she had guided it back in the right direction, she continued.
Wish I could still fly, too, so I wouldn't have to put up with this stupid jerk horse.
Looking up at the mountains, Link couldn't help but feel as though they weren't getting any closer. They remained as shadows, blotting out the sky and the stars. But the moon was high above him, and when he looked back the forest had completely disappeared from his view.
It's a lot of distance to make up in one night,
he said, riding alongside Ganondorf.
I'm aware,
was the response.
But what choice do we have? If we can make it to the pass, we'll be fine. Who do you think is after us? Not Zelda herself, surely.
He shook his head, gaze fixed on the mountains ahead.
No, I do not believe she could leave Hyrule City, even if she tried. More likely our pursuit is her royal guard. Perhaps Russell seeks vengeance for what happened to his son. I hope it's Sant,
Midna piped up from behind them.
One more chance. That's all I need. In your current state that battle would be a joke,
Ganondorf said flatly.
Pray that neither of her viziers have been set upon us.
She glowered. Ganondorf went on.
No, we have traveled a great distance, and at speed. Any pursuit would need to be similarly swift, so trained soldiers seems to be most likely. And
here he trailed off.
And
Link pressed.
And perhaps our former companion feels the need to add further to his list of betrayals.
Ganondorf clenched his teeth in a savage grin.
I do not favor his chances if that is indeed the case. Vissen,
Link said.
Vissen,
Midna echoed.
If I can spill Zant's blood, then his will have to do.
The night passed on. While it was true that he had not known Vissen for very long, the old guard had never struck him as a bad person, regardless of what his personal allegiance had turned out to be. Then again, Russell was an honest and honorable man, and his determination was what Link admired most about him, even though that same resolve would likely result in one of them killing the other. He thought briefly on whether he would be able to kill Vissen. Link knew that he would if he had to. But something told him that there was still more to Vissen than met the eye.
Does anybody else need to die?
He asked abruptly.
If you could end this dispute right now, without killing anyone, would you?
Ganondorf did not answer right away.
I would like to say yes. Really, I would. But I don't know if I could ever be content, knowing the crimes that went unpunished.
He turned to Midna, who did not hesitate one bit.
I want Zant dead. He dies by my hand.
For once, there was not a hint of mirth in her eyes. Link rode on in silence. The mountains were definitely larger in their vision now, and growing rapidly. He could already make out the individual features on the face of Snow Peak, and see the beginnings of light glimmer on the snow and ice. The sky was lightening, the inky black changing to blue and purple.
Hard!
Link shouted, urging Epona forward. She responded beautifully, leaping into a hard gallop that Link knew she had been waiting to do all night. Behind him, he heard Ganondorf and Midna spur their mounts simultaneously. For several minutes, the only sound was the whistling of the wind through his hair and the heavy rhythm of Epona's hooves on the cold ground. The sky began to lighten considerably now as the dawn approached. Link could see the narrow pass in the gap between two cliff faces.
Watch out!
Navi shouted suddenly. Link looked around frantically. A light some distance away caught his eye, a lone horseman perched on a hill waving a torch back and forth. A signal.
Gods damn it,
Ganondorf grunted. The horseman disappeared. There was another span of several minutes that passed without anything happening. The mountain range was enormous now, filling their vision. Now it was the bottleneck pass that seemed to grow no closer, despite the ground that flew by beneath them.
Come on!
Midna yelled. The first edge of the sun broached the horizon, spilling light across the grey plains.
Look!
Navi said again. From their hiding place behind a hillock, a number of riders had leapt to their feet and mounted their horses. They spilled out from their cover, circling around to move towards the mountains, and gaining speed.
How many?
Link shouted, not taking his eyes off their target. Were they a bit closer than before? Surely they must be.
20.
Navi yelled back at him, her high-pitched voice still clearly audible over the din of the horses.
They're not coming for us,
Midna said, tracking their movement.
They're going to cut us off,
was Ganondorf's response.
We have to make it into that passage before they do. Come on, girl,
Link patted Epona, although in the thrill of the race he was unsure if she noticed.
You can do it.
Their pursuers kept pace with them, several kilometers away. Link would have to take Navi's word on the fact that there were 20 riders, because they were too distant for Link to make out any one individual.
We can take them,
Midna yelled.
There's only 20. Just ride,
Ganondorf shouted back. It was quickly becoming apparent that Link, Ganondorf, and Midna were going to lose this race. The soldiers altered course slightly so as to intercept them well before they reached the gap in the mountains.
Ganondorf!
Link gritted his teeth. They were in trouble. He shifted his bow off his back and plucked an arrow from the quiver. As the minutes passed, the sound of hoofbeats intensified as the soldiers came within earshot. Link could see Russell's cape fluttering at the head of the charge now, his golden sword drawn.
Vissen!
Navi said suddenly, her superior eyesight picking out their former ally.
Vissen is with them.
She was right, Link could see him too, the growing sunlight reflecting more off his silver hair than his battle-worn armor. Instead of a spear, he too bore a brilliantly shining longsword. Russell made a sharp gesture with his free hand. Surrender!
Yeah!
Ganondorf urged even more speed from the black stallion, but the effort was hopeless. The distance between the two groups shortened abruptly. 100 meters. Epona was breathing heavily now, the sound loud in his ears. Then 75. He shifted the bow and arrow to one hand, the other still gripping the reins. Then 50. He could hear the jangling of the soldier's armor. 25. The world seemed afire in the light of the dawn. Link tugged on Epona's reins sharply, and she responded immediately, slowing up and changing direction as Midna and Ganondorf flew past him. They came together in a crash of ringing metal, Russell's sword whirling as it thudded into the thick wood of Ganondorf's staff. Midna was desperately swinging her sword, free hand working to conjure magic. Link started loosing arrows as fast as he could. The first two clattered off of Russell's armor at poor angles, and in the chaos the third flew awry and pierced a horse's throat. The animal went down with a bellow of pain, thrashing wildly and sending the other mounts into a panic. Midna screamed as her steed collapsed in a frenzy of blood and foam.
Go! Go!
Link shouted, weaving Epona through the mess. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Ganondorf break away from Russell and continue his charge towards the mountains. Plumes of flame erupted from Midna's fingers, buying precious seconds. Link seized her roughly under the shoulders and hauled her up into the saddle.
Grab hold!
She grabbed his waist with one hand and used the other to continue flinging magic. With deadly speed, Link raised his bow and fired an arrow that embedded itself deeply into one man's eye. He charged at the opening he had created, breaking free of the melee and out into the open. Link wheeled Epona about and galloped after Ganondorf, towards the mountains.
Where the hell did Ganondorf go?
She shouted from behind him.
He's ahead of us.
Link yelled back. There was a sharp whistling noise as an arrow sailed by uncomfortably close to his head.
They're shooting at us.
There was significant panic in her voice.
Stop them!
He heard a strange popping, crackling noise, which he soon realized was the sound of Midna magically striking arrow out of the air. There was a sudden cry of pain.
Oik, go faster!
She bellowed. Link dared a glance over his shoulder. Barely 10 meters behind them was Vissen, keeping pace easily, the remainder of their pursuers only a little further back.
Burn, traitor!
Midna shouted, throwing fire at their former comrade. Vissen's sword flicked out to intercept the flame, redirecting it back at them. Link steered Epona out of the magic's path, and it flared brightly against the ground beside them. They were close to the mountains now, the passage between the two cliff faces open wide before them. Ganondorf was standing between the rock walls, waiting.
What the hell is he doing?
Link ignored Midna, urging every last bit of effort from Epona. She was breathing hard, sweat slicking her mane, but she responded, galloping faster still.
Come on, girl,
Link pleaded.
Just a little further. Link,
said Midna. Ahead of them, Ganondorf raised his arms, and the Triforce on his hand glowed bright.
Just a little further.
They were so close now. Seconds away.
Link.
Vissen was alongside them, his sword drawn, his eyes cold. Midna fumbled with hers, desperate but far, far too slow. Without looking, Link reached back and seized Midna's rapier, as Vissen simultaneously raised his own blade. There was one single, deafening clang, as Link deflected the blow with Midna's sword, and then they were sailing into the crevasse, Vissen suddenly turning sharply away, shouting to his men,
Pull back! Back! Now! Pull!
Ganondorf's hands crashed to the ground, tiny stone chips tossed into the air from the impact. There was a split second of silence, followed by the cacophonous noise of 1,000 tons of rock splitting and falling to the ground. The narrow canyon shook violently as the avalanche continued, and the air became thick with dust. For a few desperate moments, Link's whole world became violent noise and chaos, and the avalanche continued, the ground shuddering and Epona thrashing about in fear. When the tremors had ceased, Link dared to wipe the stone powder from his eyes and glance about. He and Midna were alone in the canyon, still atop Epona. Ganondorf's unattended horse whinnied nervously further along the narrow passage. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust, their skin, clothes, and hair all appeared whitish-gray. The silence was broken when Midna leaned sideways and vomited loudly.
Yuang! What happened?
She wiped her mouth. Link coughed dryly, drinking quickly from his canteen and swishing it around his mouth to get rid of the taste of rock and dirt.
Ganondorf collapsed the canyon,
he said, sliding off of Epona. He poured some more water in his hands and used it to wash out her mouth, nose, and eyes.
Good girl, he whispered, good girl. You saved us both.
The dust was beginning to settle now. The entrance to the pass, where Ganondorf had been standing, was no more, buried beneath a massive pile of collapsed stone. The Hylian knights were nowhere to be seen, presumably either buried or trapped on the other side.
I think I got clipped pretty bad by an arrow back there,
Midna said, tentatively patting her backside and wincing in pain.
Ow. Yep. Geez. Of all the damn luck. Where the hell is the boss at? Look.
Link had almost forgotten about Navi, but the tiny fairy was still there, hiding in the pockets of his cloak. She fluttered out now and zipped over to a particular pile of boulders. Now that his attention was drawn, Link did indeed notice that the pile seemed to be moving oddly. With a crash, several of the rock chunks shattered and Ganondorf slumped out, coated in dust and buried to the waist. Link hurried over and helped him pull himself out. Ganondorf collapsed as soon as he was free, coughing loudly for several minutes and hacking up spittle flecked with stone fragments. He reached blindly for water, and Link handed him a canteen.
Thank you,
he said when he had struggled to his feet.
Anybody hurt? I got shot in the ass,
Midna complained.
There is so much of it to hit, how could anybody miss?
She frowned.
You know, you can be a real jerk sometimes.
Ganondorf staggered over to his horse.
I learned from the best,
he said, lifting himself up into the saddle.
What do you suppose happened to Russell and his men?
Link asked, contemplating the collapsed stone.
I should like to say they were killed,
Ganondorf said,
but it would be foolish to hope. No, Russell and Vissen are still alive, I'd wager, but now they are several days out of their way. How do you mean?
Still coughing, he raised his hand to gesture weakly.
They'll have to circle all the way around the mountain to reach Kashudo village, a journey of 3 days, 2.5 at speed. Meanwhile, we should be in the village before sundown today, even at a leisurely pace.
Link opted to lead Epona along on foot for a while, content to give the horse a well-earned rest. Midna, however, continued to insist she was in no condition to walk.
I don't suppose there's a possibility of Russell and Vissen ascending the mountain before we do.
Ganondorf chuckled.
It's sheer ice on all sides. The only path to the peak goes out of Kashudo.
Running his hand through his hair sent a small cloud of dust flying. Link felt tired, sore, and filthy. He would like nothing more than to rest for several days before attempting the no doubt hazardous climb to the top of Snow Peak. But rest came later.
We can probably afford to spend one night in the village,
Link said.
But I want to start up the mountain as soon as possible.
Ganondorf nodded.
It's dangerous to try the climb at night, anyways. You'll freeze to death. These gods of yours had better be worth it. They won't be the ones who'll need to prove their worth.
As they traveled along the canyon, the stone walls parted and the ground rose up before them. Soon they were traveling along a winding, rocky path that narrowed so much at times that they could only proceed one at a time. The temperature grew colder as they continued around Snow Peak's massive circumference. It was shortly after noon that the first flakes of snow began to fall, and these soon gave way to flurries of great, fat snowflakes that settled gently on the ground in the calm air of the sheltered canyon. Ganondorf's prediction turned out to be spot on, for it was shortly before sundown that they came upon the village of Kashudo, at the foot of Snow Peak. Although it was early in the evening, Kashudo was swathed in the shadows cast by the mountains and the twinkling gleam of firelight beckoned them onwards, towards their brief respite. Chapter end.